don't know what is going on in the background. Hopefully you can't hear it, and hopefully it does not continue to be a problem. I know it's my roommate, and I know it's my roommate's boyfriend, but I don't know what the fuck it is. Alright, so hello weirdos, welcome to my channel. My name is EmmaAbe, and I talk about books here. So I am very excited. This is a very, very exciting video that I'm doing. It's because I have officially finished my reading project concerning Goodreads. So if you don't know, every year I try to win all... I don't try to win anything. I try to read all of the winners for the Goodreads Choice Awards. Yes. And this year I not only did the winners, but I also did the runner-up. So I read all of the books in all of the categories, with the exceptions of food and cookbooks that won the 2 top votes. So that is what I did. I officially have finished, so I've read all of them. And just to get the date, it's October 19th. I finished the last book for this a couple of days ago, but we're just gonna say I officially finished it today because this is when I'm making the video. Okay, it is screen recording now correctly. Alright, here's just the homepage of the Goodreads 2020 awards. If I look down, that's because my computer is not at my island. The reason I decided to read 2 books this time instead of just the one is because I wanted more of a representation of like the genre, and I know like in order to get a full representation I need to read more in a specific genre, but for this purposes I wanted to read more than just one. I know to get like a better idea of like the entirety of the genre I should read, like, I mean, for the purposes of like the book of the Goodreads Choice Awards, I should read all of the nominees, but that would be like my entire reading for the year, and I don't want to just read the books on this list. As you can see, some of these do have ratings, my personal ratings. Some of them don't, because I haven't like gone through and rated all of the books that I've read, but I have done some of them. So let's open up the fiction. So the 2 that I read are The Midnight Library by Matt Haig and Anxious People by Frederick Bachman. Scroll down and see if I read anything else yeah, I've read none of the rest of these. If I Had Your Face looks intriguing to me, so I'm focusing on like The Midnight Library and Anxious People. Neither of these books really like impressed me. I will say Midnight Library kind of pissed me off because I think it was like meaning to say something and it wound up saying like the exact opposite message of that. At least that's how it came across to me. In my opinion, they kind of like were implying that mental health can just sort of be solved by actions that you choose, especially shit like depression. And they kind of like hand waved this away at the very end, explaining that the main character does not have depression, it's just situational depression. And I just felt like it was a little too late, and it was just the messaging kind of just like pissed me off. I don't think it was intentional, but like that's just kind of what I got from the book. It gave me like a weird feeling the entire time I was reading. The basic gist behind The Midnight Library is that when you're like close to death, or you're like hanging in like this, like making, you know, these split decisions, you go to like this weird like in-between space, and it's full of all of the possible lives that you could have lived in the form of books, and you can go visit these different lives, and that's exactly what the main character does, and you get to explore all of these like different lives. I additionally kind of thought the book was really boring, and I didn't like the messaging, so that is kind of why it wound up getting that 2 stars out of 5 for me. Anxious People was a bit different. I honestly like found it to be very boring, and I didn't really care about any of the characters. Like, I again think that like Frederick Bachman is a really good writer. He's really good at like trying to pull out the emotions that you're supposed to be feeling at certain like points in the story. I just personally did not feel those emotions. I don't know if it's just partially because I'm dead inside. That was just my personal experience with that one. So Anxious People is kind of like an ensemble piece where you're following all of these different people in this hostage situation, and you're kind of like figuring out what happened during the hostage situation and why they're all there. Yeah, I honestly kind of thought it was boring. I am such a dumbass. I said I didn't read any of the other stuff in this category. I did read Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reed, but I will be discussing that book later. I mean, I guess you can kind of tell by like the way I rated it. I give it 3 out of 5 stars. Yeah, that was just kind of my feelings on that one as well. I guess my whole thoughts on like the fiction, I don't know if it's just me, but I'm not the biggest fan of the fiction options that are given. It's not my favorite genre. I think it's hard because fiction is such a large genre. I guess I just don't really like these particular choices for in the fiction of genre. Alright, so it's mystery thriller time. Nominees for mystery thriller were The Guest List by Lucy Foley and Home Before Dark by Riley Sager and Quick Look. I did not read any of the other stuff in mystery thriller. I quite enjoyed these. I really enjoyed Home Before Dark a lot more than The Guest List. I really liked this like book within the book idea that was happening in Home Before Dark, and yeah, I was a lot more like on the seat of my toes, and I really liked the outcome of that a lot more than I did The Guest List. The Guest List, you kind of have all of these different characters in this isolated island. They're there for a wedding, and all of a sudden there is a body that appears. So we know that somebody on this island had to have been involved with the death of this person. And you kind of go through and you talk to a bunch of different people, and you figure out that the person who was murdered was an asshole. Opinion, deserved to die. Don't know if that's me, but he just was a gross predator, and I did not like him. So I thought it was fine. I quite enjoyed it. Obviously, I gave it a 4 out of 5. But yeah, it was quite enjoyable. Kept me on my toes, kept me wanting to keep reading, which I think is great. Home Before Dark is, you have this woman, and her father wrote a book about this mansion that they used to live in and how they were forced out, but like scared out because of ghosts. So, but you're following her like in her 30s. She's trying to figure out exactly what happened in their time living at this like mansion. She doesn't really remember because she was really, really young at the time. Her dad and her mom are being very cagey about what exactly happened. And also, yeah, did I say that her father published a book about the whole like events? So the whole time that you are reading her investigations and figuring out what exactly happened, you are also reading about, like, reading the book that the father wrote. And I really, really enjoyed it, and I don't want to give too much away because it was really, really good. Again, kept me on my toes. I really loved how all of there's just layers and layers and layers of things to unpeel. So how do I feel about the mystery thriller genre in general? On the whole, really, really liked the 2 that I read. I would totally be down for reading more mystery and thriller. I just have to kind of be cautious because one thing that like irks me a lot in like horror / mystery things is supernatural things. Not a huge fan of that. I like my fiction to be somewhat grounded in reality. So yeah, if you guys have any really good mystery or thriller recommendations, please drop them in the comments down below, because I'd totally be interested in reading more of these. I think it's just lately I've been super into like dark, twisted things, and mystery and thrillers are great for that. I think it leans more on the thriller rather than the mystery aspect for me personally. Alright, so let's go to historical fiction. Just looking through to see if I read any of these. So I read The Vanishing Half and Jane Austen Society. The Vanishing Half is by Britt Bennett, and the Jane Austen Society is by Natalie Jenner. Some of these do look interesting, like the Book of Longings, which I think is set in like biblical times, so not a lot of stuff is set then. And The Henna Artist is another one that looks interesting to me, because it's like featuring, you know, mostly Indian culture, which isn't really something that appears a lot in historical fiction. Not that I read a ton of historical fiction. So The Vanishing Half, I thought was really, really good. I really, really enjoyed that. You're basically following these two twin sisters. They are African American, but they are white passing, and they both go down very different trajectories in life. One of them doubles down on their African American identity, and the other completely rejects it and goes into white society. And you follow them and their children. Lots of things happen in this book, and I really liked it. Yeah, it almost didn't like feel, it obviously it was like historical fiction, but it doesn't necessarily feel that way. It's just a really interesting piece that I think that most people should read. I did not feel the same way about the Jane Austen Society. My mom read this before I did, and she really loved it. I just don't think it's a thing for me. It was a little bit too like mushy and like heartwarming for me personally. That sounds horrible. Like, it was fine, it was good. I haven't rated this one, yet. So I don't really know. I think I might give it a 3. So yeah, let's just put that in. No, not 2, 3. It didn't offend me. I usually only give 2s to like books that really piss me off, but like offend me. And then 1 I like reserve for like pieces of trash. But I don't really read a lot of pieces of trash literature. Basically, you have this group of people who live in the town that Jane Austen grew up in, or like died, and she lived a lot in this town. And they want to like preserve her legacy, so they like all band together to preserve Jane Austen's legacy, and they're all going through different things and connect to Jane Austen in different ways. Yeah, I think for me it was just a little bit too schmaltzy. It's not that there's anything wrong with chick lit. Just felt too much in that genre for me personally. How do I feel about like historical fiction as like a whole, as the genre? I think it's fine. I think it'd be kind of like a mixed bag for me based on the 2 that I read from this category. What I appreciate like the most in historical nonfiction is taking an idea and like running for it, doing something a little bit more original, like I think The Vanishing Half did, rather than doing something a little bit more of formulaic or like predictable that I hate to say it, but I think Jane Austen Society did do. Yeah, but take those with massive grains of salt. These are like the 2 not historical fiction that I think I read this entire year. But the year's not over. So let's move on to fantasy. I'm doing a quick once over. The 2 that I read in this category are House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J. Maas and The Invisible Life of Patti B. Larue by V.E. Schwab. I do want to put a little asterisk attached to the end of this and saying that I am planning on reading Black Sun by Rebecca Roanhorse in November. By the timing of this video, I have not read that book yet. Suffice it to say, I did not like either of these books. So here, let me quickly plot my rating for House of Earth and Blood. House of Earth and Blood is the first Sarah J. Maas book that I had ever read, and it completely turned me off of her. I do not want to read anything else by this author. And like, I hate to say it, like, you can love whatever you want to love, but like, I think I was hurt like emotionally by the level of queer baiting in this, and I haven't heard anybody else talk about it, and it's driving me up the fucking wall. I think the main character and her best friend are very clearly written to be in some form of romantic relationship, and I don't think I'm wrong to interpret their relationship that way. However, Sarah J. Maas keeps on insisting that the main character is straight, and that was just very hurtful. And the whole time in this book, this 800 pages of utter hetero nonsense, and I was just very hurt. And I was just like, there are things that the main character and her best friend do for each other that are not platonic. And this is coming from someone who is completely inept at understanding what things are platonic and not platonic. So I'm like, if I am seeing this, then you done fucked up. And sorry, Sarah J. Maas, if you did not intentionally write a queer character, you wound up writing a queer character. And I was just like pissed off from that, and like put into like addition that I wasn't fully like on board and in love with the world. Yeah, I don't want to say there was lots of like fictiony tropes, because yes, there were. However, that's not necessarily a bad thing. For me, it's just not necessarily what I'm reading published literature to do. Not saying that you cannot have fanfiction tropes in your books. It just happened to be like things that I did not like in said tropes. And yeah, just moving on. To The Invisible Life of Patti Larue. That one I did not like really much either. I still give it a 3-star mainly because of V.E. Schwab's writing. Her writing was beautiful and amazing. It makes me want to pick up more of V.E. Schwab's work. But the reason why The Invisible Life of Patti Larue, even though I didn't really like it, didn't get like a 2-star versus House of Earth and Blood did get a 2-star, is mainly because The Invisible Life of Patti Larue didn't like viscerally like offend me or make me mad. I think The Invisible Life of Patti Larue's biggest issue is that it's fucking boring. Nothing happens. And like, I just don't know. I was just sitting there and waiting for shit to happen, and like nothing happened. I did like the bisexual representation though. Both of the main characters are bisexual, and that was nice and wasn't really like focused a ton on, but I don't really think it needed to. I didn't really have like many feelings going into it, and I think it was like promising things that like, or at least the internet was promising things about this book that it wasn't necessarily delivering. Like, I know some people read it because they wanted to read about the whole, like, you know, angst between the relationship between Patti Larue and, like, the demon she sold her soul to, and that doesn't really happen, or at least it's not touched on, I think, the way that many people wanted. So how do I feel about, like, the fantasy genre in general? I do like fantasy. I've been reading a lot of fantasy lately, and I've been loving it. Just none of it is on, like, these lists. We'll see if some of it ends up in, like, lists later. I just think that these two in particular are not representative of like the fantasy that I really like. Yeah, and I don't necessarily think the fantasy that I like will ever be like the winners, because I think it will always be people like Sarah J. Maas and like V.E. Schwab's because of just their name recognition. So it's hard because based off of like what I read for this particular genre for the Goodreads Choice Word Reading Project, I would have to say like no, I don't really like fantasy, but that's, I know in my heart that's like not the case. All right, moving on to romance. So the two that I read in this category are From Blood and Ash by Jennifer Armentrout and Beach Read by Emily Henry. So let's talk about Beach Read because I read that one like further away and I have more time to digest. I didn't really like Beach Read. It's not that it was bad. It just wasn't like the type of romance that like I like. It's very, you know, contemporary. And I don't necessarily like a lot of contemporary romances. I tend to like my romances to be a little bit more fantastical. Yeah, it didn't really majorly offend me in any way. It was just kind of there. Anyway, so the idea behind Beach Read is that you have this main character. She's in a rut, writing-wise. She's an author. And she's also dealing with like just, I think it was her father's death. And grappling with the fact that like she loves her father, but like her father was kind of like a dick to her mom and like cheated on her, and so to kind of like process things, she moves to her father's beach house that he had purchased for his mistress, and the next door neighbor is one of her old like flings from college, and he is also a writer, and they kind of do like this enemies to like lovers, except it's not really enemies because they're not really enemies. They're just people who cannot communicate. Yeah, and it was not the type of romance personally for me. Then we come to From Blood and Ash, and this is the book that I finished the most recently. This is the last one I read for this like project, and I liked it way more than I thought I would. I think it's because it kind of hits like in the fantasy genre. I mean, not the fantasy genre alone, but I mean could also be classified as fantasy. But within romance, it's the kind of romance that like I like to see. I like other things happening in my romance other than just focusing on the two main characters, like in Beach Read. So setting the romance in like this fantasy world where like there's major political stuff was really up my alley. I loved the level of like brutality and like violence that was in this. I'm a huge fan of like angst in my romance, and I was here for the levels of angst. It gets more so at like the end. However, one thing I will say is that holy shit does it take a long time for like really anything to happen. So this book is over 600 pages. There is no fucking reason that this book needs to be over 600 pages. Like she could have cut it down, like I want to say in half, maybe not half, but like by a third, at least cut 100 pages out. Like the fuck. So I remember just reading it and I'm like, you know, I'm liking this, but like when is shit gonna happen? And then stuff does happen, and you're like, wow, that took 300 pages. Why did it take 300 pages? Unnecessary. I was not highly offended by the level of hetero-ness in this, because guess what? Jennifer Armentrout did not write a queer character accidentally. I highly appreciated the level of horniness in both of the characters. It made me feel seen. How do I feel about romance? Here's some of my feelings about romance. I do like romance, but I like a very, very particular, like, blend and flavor of romance. I don't like the typical, like, contemporary romance. Although some contemporary romances can work for me, just not all of them. I do like kind of like the higher stakes, more fantastical elements in my romance. I guess where there's like just an overarching bigger plot that involves the main characters, but is not necessarily hinged on like them getting together. If that makes any sense? Anyway, so I guess like for me, I like to read like other genres that do have heavily romance in them. And angst. Lots of angst. Put a shit ton of angst in there. This is why fanfiction is a good thing for me to read. And I do read so much of it. I don't talk about it on this channel, but holy shit do I read an ungodly, maybe not an ungodly, maybe an unhealthy amount of fanfiction. Moving on to science fiction. Okay, let me just quickly scroll down. Okay, science fiction. The two that I read are To Sleep in a Sea of Stars by Christopher Paolini and Harold the Ninth by Timothy Muir. And also asterisks on this, For the First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. This is a book I have purchased and intend on getting to eventually. I have not read it, but super interested in this because all of the genderqueer fuckery that's going to happen in that, and I'm very excited. Anyway, so focusing mainly on the two that I read. To Sleep in a Sea of Stars, I thought was like overbloated and like really long. It was one of the first ones that I read for this project. However, that being said, Christopher Paolini has a really special place in my heart because I will stand the book series Eragon until like I fucking die. Or the Inheritance Cycle, technically. Old habits die hard. So I really appreciated returning to Christopher Paolini's writing, and I liked seeing it, how it matured, and him tackling like different themes. I really liked it. And then there's Harold the Ninth. Talk about writing queer characters and actually having them be queer. You have Harold the Ninth. Oh my god. So I love Gideon the Ninth, which is the first book in the series. And Harold the Ninth wasn't as good, in my opinion, because it was really weird to like get into, because of like the shift in the writing style. It went to like a second person basically, and it was weird but totally intentional, and the payoff for it was every bit as worth it as I wanted. It's better to like not know anything going into this book, and I cannot freaking wait to read Alecto the Ninth. So yeah, I'm just fully on board the Timothy Muir train, and just like the weird fucked up shittery, queerness and necromancy and darkness. I love it. So many feelings. So in terms of like, how do I feel about science fiction? I'm way more on board with this genre than like I thought it would be. I guess it's hard for me to personally parse out the differences between fantasy and science fiction. Because one thing personally I really like in my science fiction is the science. I really like the hardcore science aspects. Think kind of what Andy Weir does. That's what I really like in my science fiction. So personally, I kind of would put Harold the Ninth and in the fantasy category, and To Sleep in a Sea of Stars more on the borderline. But really enjoy them. This is science fiction is something that I think I should allow myself to get into a little bit more and not get as caught up in the like semantic difference between the specific genre a thing might be categorized into. But let's move on to horror. So, It's Lying to You. I have read some of this. I haven't rated stuff yet. And I don't know if I will rate them right now. I read 3 books this time in this category. The first is Mexican Gothic. This is by Silvia Moreno Garcia, and If It Bleeds by Stephen King, and also Tender is the Flesh. This is by Agustina Batseriga. And again, asterisks for this category as well, because I am planning on reading The Only Good Indians by Stephen Graham Jones in the upcoming month. It's later when I'm recording this. I've not read it yet, so Okay, so let's talk about If It Bleeds, because that's the one I liked the least. I think Stephen King is a weird one for me. Like, I like some of his work does not work for me. Again, I think it goes back to like the whole fantastical elements. For me, horror comes in humans being shitty to other humans. And for some of Stephen King's work, it's very like supernatural and not human-based where the horror is coming from, and that just doesn't get me as much. So some of the stuff was like weird and like unexplainable human-wise. So some of the essays, particularly in If It Bleeds, just did not get me on a horror level because of the supernatural aspect of it. Mexican Gothic toes that line really, really well, and I think it succeeds in staying on the natural side of the supernatural boundary, but barely. I'm first of all, so glad it won over Stephen King, because I think Stephen King so easily wins these categories, and I'm glad he did not this time. Mexican Gothic, I was just super impressed. I don't know what I was expecting. I wasn't expecting much, and I was just impressed on how like intellectual that this book was, when it did not necessarily need to be. Like, all of the references to anthropology and history and society and culture, and like it was just so good and so well done. Highly enjoyed it. The explanation kind of is like what is happening is with the like moss fungus thing, really toeing the line there. But I think it toed the line, but I think it stayed within the natural side. I don't think it necessarily creeped me out. It was just like a mind fuck, I think, eventually by the end. And I really enjoyed it. I'm going to talk a little bit about Tender as the Flesh. I heard the synopsis of this, that this had cannibalism in it, and I was like, sign me the fuck up. And it was just as gross and disgusting as like you would expect it to be, and it made me so happy. Loved humans being fucking terrible to other humans. And yeah, don't eat when you're reading this book. Just don't. I did. It was a mistake. Just disgusting. So basically the idea behind this book is that there is a virus that wipes out a lot of the meat, the consumable meat, so like pigs, cows. It doesn't kill them, it just makes them toxic to humans. So humans have to figure out a different way of finding protein and suspend disbelief about veganism and vegetarianism for a second. So what do humans do? They turn to other humans, and it's just as fucked up and gross as you think. Yeah, and you follow this guy who works as like some sort of like official at a meat processing plant. And it's nasty. And I loved it. So horror. I think this year especially has just led me to appreciate horror a lot more. I think last year with the two winners, or the two that I read, were disappointing for different reasons. But this year kind of like helped me appreciate how much I really do like horror, and so I didn't really expect to find that, to figure that out, but again, I did, and I'm so happy. And I want to preface this by saying that I like a very specific type of horror, not just any horror, natural horror, as in not supernatural. So humans doing fucked up things to other humans is my fucking jam. Yeah, The Road made me happy. So let's go to the humor category. Okay, so humor just in general is not something that like I read a lot exclusively. I like humor in my stories, but I won't necessarily pick up a book that is solely supposed to be a humor book. I have a freaking bug bite on my hand and it's driving me crazy. Let me just take a quick gander. The only two that I read is Strange Planet by Matthew W. Pline? Sure. And Wow, No Thank You by Samantha Irby. I really liked Strange Planet a lot more. I think it really feeds well into our like meme culture, because I feel like that's essentially what Strange Planet was created, was a bunch of like, not necessarily memes per se, but like 4-panel, I don't know how to correctly say this in terms of comics, but 4 panels of jokes repeated throughout this book, with them all having dealing with the central idea of just what it is like to grow up and come of age and all this stuff. Lots of jokes surrounding that. Some of them I thought to be very funny, and I reference and I will like come back to, and I'm just be like, yes, that was a funny part of the book. I enjoyed it. It didn't like blow me away, But I did chuckle. I did laugh. Wow, no thank you, on the other hand, I'm just gonna put it, rate that one real fast. But that one was a 3 because I just did not care. Samantha Irby's like comedy like wasn't necessarily like for me. And I didn't know anything about Samantha Irby before reading her book, and I think I laughed like once or twice. Not saying that Samantha Irby isn't funny, she's just not my particular brand. And maybe if I saw her like in a live show, it'd be a different story. But like with just this book in particular, it wasn't really for me. It's a collection of essays. Some of the essays I think worked better than others. So how do I feel about the humor category in general? It can be hit or miss. I think I came to the same conclusion last year. It was very hit or miss as well. So I think it literally just depends on who the author is, what is the medium that they're writing through, and a bunch of other things. So I think this is one of the ones where like the author and knowing the author's like comedy style is very, very important. All right, nonfiction, my bread and butter. So I always read a ton of nonfiction every year. I don't know what the current rate is, so I'm not necessarily going to talk about every single book that I read that is also on here, because that would be a lot, but I will mention it. So, Stamped, Racism, Anti-Racism in You. This is by Jason Reynolds and Ibram X. Kennedy. I read Hood Feminism, Notes from Women That a Movement Forgot by Nikki Kendall. Also read Minor Feelings and Asian American Reckoning by Kathy Park Hwang. I also read Hidden Valley Road, Inside the Mind of an American Family. I also read. This is by Robert Kolker. So I think in general with the nonfiction that came out in 2020, or technically 2019, not necessarily my favorites. A lot of the nonfiction that was coming out wasn't necessarily stuff I was gravitating to in general. And I felt this way kind of like a lot of things, especially while judging the BookTube prize. Not saying that there weren't any that were good, there obviously were. I did quite enjoy some of them, but just none of them were stuff that I was particularly interested in. And I think that goes to show, given that I only read 4 of the ones from this category. So I'm going to mainly focus on Stamped and Hood Feminism. Stamped was really, really good. I think it is a really good book to give to people in high school / middle school. It is essentially a younger version. The target audience is a younger version of Ibram X. Kendi's book, Stamped from the Beginning. I have not read Stamped from the Beginning, but I want to, because I read this. Yeah, very good. I'm very glad that like local libraries and high school libraries have Stamped in it, because it's a good book to read. Hood Feminism, I think on a very, very similar level, is really good. I would give this like a 4 out of 5. It didn't really like uproot or was like life-changing in any way, but it was still a really, really good piece of feminism, and it's one of those things, if you're going to be reading about feminism, it's one of those books that I would suggest that you put on the list, because it is specifically talking kind of about all of those intersections of feminism that a lot of things like white feminism like removes or forgets entirely in the conversation of feminism. So how do I feel about nonfiction? 2020 was kind of a crappy year for nonfiction, in my opinion, for the stuff that I like. But that's okay. There's still good stuff, and I'm still going to keep reading nonfiction. Memoir and autobiography next. Okay. Right, this section. Is it horrible to say that I think that the memoir section was kind of a fucking mess? A lot of this are like celebrity memoirs, and celebrity memoirs are not always the best kinds of memoirs, but they can be pretty good. So it just kind of depends. What did I read? I read Notes on Silencing by Lacey Crawford. I also read not the Untamed, they don't get that title, Untamed by Glennon Doyle, and Promised Land by Barack Obama. I'm mainly going to focus on the first 2. I will say that Notes on Silencing is very, very good. It is very much another book in the style of Know My Name. So if you really like Know My Name, check out Notes on Silencing, but hella trigger warnings. I did not like Untamed by Glennon Doyle. I thought it was fine. I give it 3 stars. It didn't make me mad. It just kind of like is very much has girl boss energy and self-help energy, and I like neither of those things. Not that saying that women being bosses is not a bad thing, but it's in terms of girl boss, in terms of the way the internet collectively uses it and the toxicity that comes with that. A lot of people connected to Untamed. I did not. I felt like Glennon Doyle was trying to assert and push certain things that she thought was correct onto people, and that's very much comes through with the whole self-help-y aspect of this memoir as well. Super happy that she's able to live her truth, though, as a lesbian woman. Good on you, Glennon. It takes a lot of courage to leave your husband and uproot your kids' lives. But good for her for doing that. Promised Land by Barack Obama. It was really good. Barack Obama is a good author. However, it's so fucking long. It's a lot of minutia in there, that things that don't really matter that much. Like a lot of just like ridiculous meetings that he had with heads of state. It's like, dude, that does not matter. I feel kind of awful for saying that. It does make me want to read more of Barack Obama's writing. There's going to be more volumes to this because it's, his presidential memoirs. I do not know if I would continue to read those, because if it's going to be on the level that this book was, oh god, that's a lot. Because this book basically ends after Osama bin Laden is assassinated, so that's not even his first term. So how do I feel about memoir and autobiography? Memoirs were never really my go-to in the nonfiction genre, and I think that will continue to be the same. Because I think that there could be a lot of really good memoirs, but there can also be a lot of shit that you have to shift through as well. And I think that proves true for this year. Let's go to history and biography. So this is more of the stuff that I personally like. Okay, so I read 3. And that is Cast the Origin of Our Discontents by Isabel Wilkerson, The Splendid and the Vile by Eric Larson, and The Address Book by Deirdre Mask. But with this year, the stuff just, none of it really interested me that much. It's I feel like a lot of the stuff that is being written about this year is a lot on war and presidential politicking, or just politicking in general. And not that I don't like reading about politics, it's just not always my go-to thing, because I think it can take a while for us to see the ramifications of politics. I gave The Splendid and the Vile 4 out of 5 stars. Probably more of a 3.5, because it wasn't necessarily bad, and it didn't offend me or anything like that. I did not care about the Blitz, because it's all about the Blitz. It is 300, 400 pages of the Blitz, and it's, kind of like my thing with World War II. I don't like reading about it because I get triggered very easily. Cast Origins of Our Discontents, so good, giving that a 5 out of 5. That was very, very good. It basically looks at race within America, but it also compares and contrasts it to caste systems in India, and also the Nazis. So that wasn't always, those Nazi parts weren't always fun to read. However, they were shocking. There are moments from this book that will stick with me forever, and passages, specifically when she's talking about Nazis. History and biography tends to also be very Eurocentric. My tastes have increasingly grown away from that. You probably won't see most of the nonfiction that I've really been liking this year on these lists for those reasons. So how do I feel about history and biography? Again, kind of a little bit disappointing with the lineup this year. Haven't been really wanting to read a lot of it because I've been focusing on reading different things. Again, taking away from the non-US and non-European-centric reading. But yeah, I'll continue to read history and biographies. Alright, so let's talk about science and technology. This is stuff that I always get excited about. I love science, I love reading about science. So I only read 3 as well in this. That is The Life on Our Planet by David Attenborough, How to Argue with a Racist by Adam Rutherford, and The Next Great Migration by Sonia Shah. And again, asterisks, Book of Eels, I do want to read. I own a copy of it. I am so excited to crack that book open. And there's other ones that I've marked as want to read, but I don't own copies of those, so when will I read those? I don't know. So again, I'm going to kind of focus on the 2 that I read the winner and the runner-up. I highly enjoyed both of these books. I think that this is, for both books, it was a very, very, very pleasant experience for me. I think it's just because it's shit that I like reading. So How to Argue with a Racist was all about genetics and how race doesn't exist on a, scientific genetic biology level. However, racism and race as a social construct does exist. This is the kind of stuff that like totally changed like my attitude in a lot of my early anthropology classes that I took my first year at college. I don't necessarily think I learned much from How to Argue with a Racist. However, that's because a lot of that stuff I learned from my anthropology classes, specifically my biological anthropology classes. So do I think that the average human would get shit out of this? Yes. Read it, please. It's like very short as well. And Life on Our Planet was like having a nice conversation with a old loving grandpa who's just like, hey, I know I'm not going to be around for very much longer, but like I want to make sure your grandbabies are okay. It was very pleasant. I think that David Attenborough does like a mix of gently telling us that you done fucked up, we all done fucked up, and stuff is going to get a lot worse before it gets better, but hey, there's still hope. So I think he strides that balance really, really well, and I highly enjoyed it. So for like science and technology, I think out of all of the nonfiction categories that I read from for this, I enjoyed the science and technology the most. I just think that like the topics of like learning about different types of wildlife and also like genetics and evolution, climate change are all things that like very much interest me and I find to be compelling, and is more of the stuff that I would gravitate to normally anyway, led me to really enjoy this like topic overall. Science and technology was a great experience. I'm so glad that like I read the stuff that I read from it. Alright, so we're going to quickly skip over food and cookbooks because I didn't read anything. Graphic novels and comics coming up next. So I only read two, and that is Heartstopper by Alice Oseman and Fangs by Sarah Anderson. So I did not like Fangs. Fangs didn't highly offend me or anything like that. I just thought I was going to get more of a story when it was really just more of a bunch of vignettes stringed together. Like, honestly, this could be reduced to like basically memes of like, oh, isn't it so funny that like because she's a vampire, like she can only do this, because he's a werewolf, he can like only do this. So the conceit of Fangs is that it's what if a vampire and a werewolf dated, and all of the jokes that come from that. And I thought I was gonna get like a story, and there is no story. I was down for like the romance, and there was a romance, but like there's no story. It just turned out to be a bunch of werewolves and vampire jokes, and it's just different than like what I was expecting. Heartstopper by Alice Oseman. Dude, I love these two gay boys. They're idiots and I love them. Heartstopper is just as cute as you would expect. I kind of would like more of like an overarching like story, more angst. It's one of those like if you really like coffee shop AUs in your fanfiction, then you'll like this. It's that nice bit of like sweetness and like sugar that like doesn't last like super long in the mix of all of like my darker, depressing, angsty like stuff that I read surrounding romance. And I think that I do tend to like give queer stuff a little bit more grace because of the fact that like it is queer, and just the thirst and the need and the digging that I do for representation in like media. So like I will let Heartstopper get away with being a little bit more like tropey and stuff like that than I would for like a straight thing, because of the fact that like, hey, here's representation that I'm practically starved for, and luckily that's changing. Whereas like I can see two straight people being straight and gross whenever I want. How do I feel overall about like the comics and graphic novels section? It's one of those things where like I should read more of, and I want to read more of, and I should add that into my diet. But I need to like look at the genres that I like within graphic novels, because graphic novels are like a medium. It's not really a genre. Poetry next. Poetry's not my thing. I don't really like poetry in general. I think it can make a very, very powerful message, I read Margaret Atwood's Dearly and Violent Bent Backwards Over the Grass, and they're probably both going to get a 3. Violent Bent Backwards Over the Grass would probably be more of a 2.5 or ended up to a 3 because of the freaking fact that the audiobook does not sync with the book. And that pisses me off because like that's like an accessibility issue, and that's not that hard to do, to shove around the poems correctly. And it was done with no seemingly rhyme or reason. I will say that Violent Backwards Over the Lana Del Rey book, I didn't know many of Lana Del Rey's poetry or her songs. I liked some of it. I liked the rhythm in it. And I liked some of Margaret Atwood's poems in Dearly. I just think that like for me, like with poetry, I like an overarching story. Poetry just is not for me. Overall feelings about poetry is I'm gonna keep trying. I'm gonna keep like reading this because even though it's not my go-to genre, I think it's good to stretch yourself, and this is like I think the biggest stretch of all of the genres that I'm currently reading, and I don't think it would be a good thing for me to just cut out reading the poetry winner. I think I need to find the poetry that I like and that I connect to. Go to debut novel. The ones that I read for debut novel was Such a Fun Age by Kylie Reid and Cemetery Boys by Aiden Thomas. I guess I also did read the Jane Austen Society, which I did talk about before, and the same asterisk applies about The First Sister by Lyndon A. Lewis. Not read that yet. Such a Fun Age was fine. It's a very, very interesting like concept to start with, where you have this African-American woman, she's accused of stealing this white child, and there's a confrontation with the police, and that's more of the inciting incident. I thought that event was gonna like be more important in the overarching story, and like it is, because that's how the main character meets her boyfriend, but it really isn't that important. It's a good book club book pick because you can have lots of interesting discussions about race. I think it is very interesting to see the conversation from the point of view of race, from like the boyfriend's point of view, and also her boss's point of view. I think they both make valid points, and I like that we followed the main character and hearing her side of things. Again, it didn't really offend me. It was a fine book. Cemetery Boys, though, on the other hand, I fucking loved. Talk about queer stories with the Latino representation. It was kind of like everything I wanted. I kind of wish that I saved it to read now, but I'm so glad that I read it when I did, because I bought a freaking copy of that book, and yes. Basically, Cemetery Boys is about this young boy, Gabriel, and he really wants to prove himself as a brujo instead of a bruja, which is like everybody's trying to make him take up the mantle of bruja, and he's just like, no, I'm a brujo. I want to be recognized as a brujo. Also, Gabriel is trans. How he decides to prove himself as a brujo is by finding one of his cousins. Cousin was like murdered, trying to find his soul. Shit does not go as planned. He performs this ritual right before Dia de los Muertos, and he winds up summoning a classmate. And shit unfolds. Romance ensues. Like, this is kind of shit that I'm talking about, like with romance, where there's like a bigger story where they're trying to Julian is the person that he summons. They're trying to return Julian to his body, find his body, solve this like mystery of what the fuck is going on, all before Dia de Muertos. Loved it. I think the representation in this, it was everything I wanted, and it was great, and it was wonderful, and I'm so glad this book exists. Please make more books like this, please. Thank you. Moving on to YA fiction. I feel like we have so much more to go. Oh my god. The two that I read is Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo and A Good Girl's Guide to Murder by Holly Jackson. The type is small. This is like YA, almost like contemporary. Not necessarily like my cup of tea. I've been transitioning away from like YA fiction for a very long time now. Not saying that like there can't be good YA fiction, there absolutely can, and it's valid. I've moved on from that part in my life where I felt the need to constantly read this. That being said, I think that both of these books that I read were good, but they wouldn't be necessarily the ones that I pick up off the shelves. So Clap When You Landed is an example of how I like to consume my poetry. It's told in verse, but it tells an overarching story. So it's done in a poetic way, if that makes any sense. So it's like poetry, it's in verse. The story is that there are these two girls, and they both lose their father in this plane crash. Their father is the same person, and these two girls do not know each other. They meet each other, basically dealing with their father's passing. Interesting exploration into grief. Gonna be honest, I think their mother's story would have been a lot more interesting. I was a lot more interested in hearing more about both of their respective mothers. One of the mothers is dead and gone, so we don't really get to hear about her personal experiences. That's kind of all I'm gonna say on that. Like, it's good. Didn't really live up for the hype personally for me. Then it comes to A Good Girl's Guide to Murder. I thought it was interesting. I enjoyed it. It kept me entertained. It wasn't like life-changing or anything, so I think I'm gonna put this one at like a 4. It was good. It was fine. It was interesting. Lots of twists. Did not see some of the twists coming. So I appreciated that. How do I feel about like YA fiction in general? It can be good. I don't know if it's something that I'm going to continuously reach for, and I don't think it's going to be something where I push myself to pick up more of anyway. But I think it's like when I do pick them up, it's going to be like a nice thing. Can be nice. Talking about YA fantasy and science fiction. So I read Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, Cemetery Boys by Aidan Thomas, and Asterix for this one is These Violent Delights by Chloe Gong. I do have that. I do not know if I have it with me, but those are the ones that I do want to read, and I'm very excited about reading. Let's just say that, like, I did not really enjoy Queen of Nothing by Holly Black, and I did not really enjoy Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins, for different reasons. Queen of Nothing was not on board with, like, this whole trilogy in the first place. Did not really care. That being said, I like the Queen of Nothing the most out of all 3 of the books. It's just not my personal, like, genre or sub-genre. Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes, I think, had lots of potential. They just Suzanne Collins didn't go balls to walls with, like, the darkness of it. I think it disappointed me. Like, it's so hard to do a villain origin story correctly because you want to try and make the villain sympathetic, and you kind of can't because they're a villain. You need to make them evil. It just pisses me off in general about, like, things where they do villain origin stories. Villain origin stories can be very, very interesting if you do them correctly. Make them a fucking villain. Show them why. Like, it just... Too often I see that people try and show the villains as, like, these, like, secretly good characters, and I'm like, some people you just can't make that way, and I think you just have to show President Snow as, like, a ruthless killer. Like, have him be disgusting and manipulative the entire time, instead of, like, slowly, like, trying to fall into that way where the payoff doesn't really work very well because it's not evenly done. It felt very abrupt, like, at the end. The turns that Snow did. But I did really like Cemetery Boys, and I'm very excited to read These Violent Delights. I understand why, like, these two, like, won the higher spots, because Holly Black, Suzanne Collins, those are no names. They're popular names. They're sure to sell. But they're not necessarily, I think, representative of all of YA fantasy or science fiction. How I feel about YA fantasy and science fiction overall is, again, I don't think the winners are truly representative of the stuff that's out there. I think that YA is taking lots of new risks recently, and maybe that's just because I don't read enough of it and I don't see it. I feel like YA fantasy is almost like a safe place for me because I have many, many gripes with, like, adult fantasy. Mainly the overuse of just rape as just a thing that happens and it's just not given any weight. That doesn't really happen with, like, YA fantasy, because you kind of can't. And I think in that way I really enjoy YA fantasy, and I think I will continue to read it. Yeah, I don't really know how to, like, articulate my feelings except that. So we're getting close to the end. Second to last category. So we have Best Middle Grade and Children's. And the ones that I read are mainly The Trials of Apollo by Rick Riordan, This is The Tower of Nero by Rick Riordan and The One and Only Bob by Catherine Applegate. So I really, really liked The Tower of Nero because it's Rick Riordan. Rick Riordan, I will read all of his things. End of story. He has consistently won this prize, and I will consistently read his stuff because it's good. The One and Only Bob, I felt skewed really, really young, and it wasn't exactly to my taste. I'm glad it kind of explored darker themes than I was expecting to get out of it. Those are mainly my thoughts. How do I feel about middle grade and children's? I don't think it's going to be something that I potentially keep reading, unless it's Rick Riordan, because it's Rick Riordan. Alright, picture books. I think, I'm going to be honest, I don't know if I'm going to continue reading the picture book category, just because I don't get much out of it. It's these are for children, and I'm not a child, and I do not have children. That might change one day when I actually have children, but I do not currently, as of this moment, have children. So I do not think that I will be reading this next year. But let's talk about the two that I read. The two that I read are Anti-Racist Baby by Ibram X. Kendi and who else? Somebody else did the illustrations. And so the other book is Just Like Me by Vanessa Brantley Newton. I thought they were both fine. I rated them both as 3 because neither of them offended me, and I didn't love either of them. I think they're both fine children's books. I don't really know what else to say about them. I know a lot of people say there's lots of value in children's books, and I agree. There are a lot of children's books that I read when I was small that I really, really liked. I just think that with the absence of a child, it's harder to get more out of them. Personally, I'm not going to be reading more picture books. I'm really not. Unless I were to teach small children, which is probably never going to happen. I'm going to stop screen recording. Alright, how do I feel about this whole thing? Will I keep doing this? Yes, I will probably continue to do this because I think it's fun. And it's fun to try new things. There are books that I think are awesome. There are books that suck ass. So I think it can be a really mixed bag, but it's always fun to see what the results are. Next year, I'm not sure if I'm going to change up the plan. I do know for sure I will read the winners. I don't know if I will read the runner-ups. I don't know. I really did like reading more than one because I think it helped me get a better picture of the genre as a whole. So I think I will kind of keep it to reading 2. What those 2 are, I don't know. I might do it where I read the one that got the most votes, one that got the least votes. I might do it where the one that got the most votes and one that I find interesting. I don't know. I think definitively though for next year, I am going to not read the picture books just because I don't get much out of it. So that means I will read all the other genres with the exception of picture books and cookbook. This was really fun. I think I learned some things about myself. Yeah, I cannot wait for the results to come out this year. Maybe, who knows, by the time you see this, the results for the 2021 winners will be out, but as of the filming, they're not. So, yeah, alright. So, thank you so much for watching. This is a ridiculous video, ridiculous length. Hopefully I can cut it down so it's not 1 hour and 30 minutes. Let me know in the comments down below, what is a book that you read from this list that you really, really liked and that you would recommend for me? Bye!